Too old to be loved at 30, they said, until the cowboy chose her as his forever wife. There is a certain kind of loneliness that doesn't make noise. It doesn't cry in the middle of the night. It doesn't beg for attention. It just sits there, quietly, in the back of your chest, like a dull ache you've gotten so used to that you stop noticing it. Until one morning you wake up, look around at the life you've built, and realize something is missing. Not money, not a job, not even love exactly. Just peace. Just the feeling that you are in the right place, at the right time, living the right life. Clara was 30 years old when she first felt that ache, clearly enough to name it. She was sitting in the bathroom of her Chicago apartment at 6:47 in the morning, toothbrush in hand, staring at herself in the mirror. She wasn't crying. She wasn't upset. She just looked at her reflection for a long moment and thought, "Who are you? And what do you actually want?" She didn't have an answer, and that scared her more than anything else. To the outside world, Clara's life looked fine. More than fine, actually. She had a good apartment in Lincoln Park, small but hers, with a bay window that caught the morning light just right. She had a steady job in marketing at a mid-size firm downtown. She had friends who texted her memes and met her for brunch on weekends. She had a gym membership she used 3 times a week, and a skincare routine she never skipped. On paper, she was doing great. But paper doesn't tell the whole story. For the past 3 years, Clara had been in a relationship with a man she had tried very hard to love. His name doesn't matter much now, but what matters is this. He was the kind of person who could make you feel like the most interesting person in the room one day, and completely invisible the next. He had a way of commenting on things, little things mostly, that slowly, quietly, made Clara start to question herself. The way she laughed too loud at restaurants, the way she got too emotional during arguments, the way she had too many opinions for someone who worked in marketing. He never said she was too much, he just acted like she was, and after 3 years of that, Clara had started to believe it. She ended things 6 months before that bathroom mirror moment. Everyone told her she was brave. Her friends took her out for drinks. Her coworker gave her a card that said, "New chapter," with a little drawing of an open book. But the truth was, leaving hadn't felt like bravery. It had felt like amputation. Necessary. Painful. And leaving behind a part of herself she wasn't sure she'd get back. So there she was, 6 months out, 30 years old, single, and completely unsure what to do next. The call from her mother's cousin about the farmhouse came on a Thursday in late April. Her grandmother, her mother's mother, a woman named Ruth who Clara had adored since childhood, had passed away the previous winter after a short illness. The farmhouse she had lived in for 60 years, out in rural Montana, had been left to Clara. No conditions, no strings, just a handwritten note in the will that said, "I always thought you'd need somewhere to breathe." Clara read that line 4 times. She had been to the farm only twice as a child. What she remembered was wide-open sky, a porch that creaked in the middle when you stepped on it, and her grandmother making biscuits at 5 in the morning like it was the most natural thing in the world. She remembered feeling safe there in a way she hadn't felt anywhere since. She called her boss and asked for 2 weeks of unpaid leave. She told her friends she needed some air. She packed 2 suitcases, loaded them into a rental car, and drove west. Harlow, Montana, has a population of about 2,400 people. It has 1 gas station, 1 diner, 1 church, 1 bar, a feed store that doubles as a hardware store, and a school that serves every grade from kindergarten to 12th. The nearest city is 3 hours away. The sky there is the kind of big that makes you feel very small. Not in a bad way, exactly. More like how standing at the edge of the ocean makes you feel. Like the world is larger than your problems. Clara arrived on a Tuesday afternoon when the light was gold and the air smelled like dirt, and something clean she couldn't name. She parked in front of the farmhouse and just sat in the car for a minute. The house was smaller than she remembered. The porch did still creak in the middle. The yard was overgrown and the gutters needed work, and one of the shutters on the second-floor window was hanging at a sad angle. The whole place needed attention, but it was standing, and it was hers. She got out of the car, stood in the driveway, and took a breath so deep it hurt a little. Then she said, out loud, to absolutely no one. Okay, let's see what happens. The first few days were rough in a practical sense. The water heater made a noise on startup that could wake the dead. One of the kitchen burners didn't light right away. You had to click it about 9 times before it caught. The internet connection was technically present, but operated more like a suggestion than a reality. And on day 3, the kitchen water pipe under the sink decided it had held on long enough. Clara was standing in a slow-spreading puddle of water, phone in one hand, searching, how do you shut off a farm water main with the other, when she heard a knock at the front door. She opened it, dripping slightly, fully expecting a neighbor come to introduce herself with a pie or a casserole. It was not a neighbor with a casserole. It was a man. Tall, dark jacket, worn work boots that had been worn long before the trend. He had the kind of face that looked like it had been outside for most of its life. Tanned, a little weathered, a few lines near the eyes that came from squinting into sun, not from frowning. He was maybe mid-30s. He was holding his hat in his hands, which Clara's grandmother had always said was a sign of good manners in a man. He said, "I saw the car. I'm Eli. I run the Callaway Ranch next door. Noticed the water pooling under your south wall from the road. Thought I'd check." Clara blinked. "You could see that from the road?" "The soil was darker," he said, simply. Like that was obvious. She stepped aside and let him in. He found the shutoff valve in 4 minutes. Fixed the pipe in 12, accepted a cup of coffee when she offered it, sat at the kitchen table, and did not ask her a single personal question. He asked about the pipe. He told her the water heater noise was normal and would get quieter after a week. He said the gutter on the north side was pulling away from the fascia and would need attention before the next rain. Then he finished his coffee, thanked her, and left. Clara stood in her kitchen for a moment after the door closed. She thought, that was the most peaceful 10 minutes she'd had with another person in longer than she could remember. He came back the following week. She hadn't asked him to. She was on the porch trying to figure out why the riding mower wouldn't turn over when his truck pulled up, and he got out and just looked at it. He crouched down, examined the engine for a moment, asked her where her toolbox was, and had the thing running in 25 minutes. "Do you just patrol the area looking for problems to solve?" Clara asked. He almost smiled. Not quite, but almost. "Your grandmother used to call if she needed something. I figured you might not know to call yet." That stopped Clara short. "You knew my grandmother?" "Since I was about 8 years old," he said. "She was a good woman. Fed me lunch more times than I can count." Clara didn't know what to say to that. So she just said, "Thank you, Eli." He nodded, got back in his truck, drove away. She watched the dust settle on the road after he left and felt something she hadn't felt in a long time. Taken care of. Not in an overwhelming way, not in a way that asked anything back, just quietly, steadily taken care of. The town of Harlow started paying attention to Clara around day 10. Small towns work like that, not because people are nosy. Well, not only because people are nosy, but because everyone is connected to everyone else, and a new face matters. Clara was Ruth's granddaughter. Ruth had mattered to Harlow for 60 years. That meant Clara mattered too, at least until proven otherwise. The woman who ran the diner, a warm, round-faced woman named Dot, who had been there so long the booth cushions had formed to her regular shapes, came by with a pot of chicken soup on Clara's 4th day and sat down without being invited. "So you're staying?" Dot asked. "Just for a couple weeks," Clara said. Dot nodded like she didn't quite believe that. "Your grandmother said you'd come back someday. Said you just needed a reason." "She said that?" "Mm-hmm. She was right about most things." Clara didn't push back on that. She just ate the soup, which was genuinely the best thing she'd tasted in months, and let herself be taken care of by a stranger who didn't feel entirely like a stranger. The absence of city noise, of constant email, of the low-grade pressure that living in a big city puts on you just by existing, all of that helped. Clara started sleeping through the night for the first time in over a year. She started waking up without an alarm and not feeling like the day was already behind her. She started cooking actual meals instead of eating protein bars over the sink. But the thoughts still came, usually around evening. That specific hour of fading light when the farm got quiet and there was nothing to distract her from her own head. She thought about her ex. Not because she missed him, but because she was trying to understand how she had let herself shrink so much inside that relationship. When had she stopped saying what she really thought at dinner? When had she started apologizing for laughing too loud? She kept turning it over, like a stone she couldn't put down, trying to find the moment it had all gone wrong. She also thought about what came next. Chicago still existed. Her apartment was still there, her job still waiting, with a patience that wouldn't last forever. She had a life to go back to. She just wasn't sure she wanted to go back to it. Her mother called on a Wednesday evening, 3 weeks into the stay. It started well enough. Her mother asked about the house. Clara told her about the repairs, about Dot and the soup, about how the mornings were cold but beautiful. Her mother made sounds of interest that Clara recognized as polite holding pattern sounds, waiting for the moment she could say the thing she actually called to say. It came about 7 minutes in. "So what's the plan, Clara? You can't just stay on that farm indefinitely." "I know, Mom." "You're 30. These years matter. You should be settling down, thinking about, Mom. I'm just saying. I know what you're saying. You've been saying it since I was 26, and I just need you to stop for a second and hear me when I tell you. I am not a timeline. I am a person. And right now this person needs to breathe." Silence on the other end. Then her mother said, quietly, "I just don't want you to be alone." And Clara said, "I know, but I need you to understand there's a difference between being alone and being lonely. I haven't been alone here, but I was very lonely back there, even with someone." More silence. Her mother said she'd call next week. Clara said, "Okay." They hung up. Clara sat on the porch for a long time after that, watching the sky go dark, feeling the weight of a conversation she'd needed to have for 4 years and had never managed to say out loud until that moment. She heard boots on the gravel before she saw him. Eli had come to drop off a part for the water heater he'd ordered in town. He saw her on the porch, took one look at her face, and instead of asking what was wrong, he just sat down in the other chair. They didn't talk for a long time. He didn't ask. She didn't explain. The sky went from orange to purple to black, and the stars came out slowly, one by one, until there were more of them than seemed possible. Eventually, Clara said, "Do you ever feel like everyone around you has a very clear idea of who you're supposed to be, and it has almost nothing to do with who you actually are?" Eli was quiet for a moment. Then, "Yeah, I do. How do you deal with it?" He thought about it seriously, the way he seemed to think about most things. "I stopped asking their permission." Clara looked at him. "Not in a rude way," he added. "Just, I decided what kind of man I wanted to be, and I let that be enough. Other people's opinions stopped being the measuring stick." Clara didn't say anything, but she turned that over in her mind for the rest of the night, long after he'd gone home. The letter changed things. It wasn't a letter anyone had written to Clara. It was a page from her grandmother's old journal, a green hardcover book she found in the bottom drawer of the bedroom dresser, underneath a stack of folded handkerchiefs that still smelled faintly of lavender. Clara wasn't going to read it. It felt private, personal, like something that belonged to a person and not to the world. But the journal fell open to a certain page as she lifted it out, and she saw the date at the top, May 12, 1962, and one line caught her eye before she could look away. She read it once. Then she sat down on the floor and read it again. Her grandmother had written, "They all thought I had missed my chance. I was 31 and people talked about me at church like I was already a cautionary tale. And then Henry just showed up one afternoon and said hello like there was nothing unusual about it at all. He didn't look at me like I was someone who had missed something. He looked at me like I was exactly where I was supposed to be." Clara sat on that bedroom floor for a long time. Her grandmother, the woman who had biscuits ready at 5 in the morning, who had made this house feel like the safest place in the world, who had been married to Henry for 47 years before he passed, had been 31 when she found love, had been talked about at church like a cautionary tale, had known this exact feeling, and she'd left that journal page open without knowing it would be found. Or maybe she had known. Maybe, in that way grandmothers sometimes have, She had known exactly what her granddaughter would need to find. Clara closed the journal carefully, set it on the nightstand, and cried, quietly, for about 20 minutes. Not from sadness, from something that felt a lot like relief. 2 weeks became a month. A month became 6 weeks. Clara called her boss and explained that she needed more time. Her boss, surprisingly, was understanding. They'd been trying to move her team to remote work anyway, and this seemed like an opportunity to test it. She was given 3 months of remote work, with a check-in at the end. She bought a good router so the internet stopped being a suggestion. She started fixing the house. Not all at once, not with any grand plan, just one thing at a time, the way you do when you don't quite know where you're going, but you know you need to keep moving. She repainted the kitchen herself, a warm cream color that made the morning light look like honey. She cleared the backyard of years of overgrowth and found, underneath it all, the remnants of her grandmother's vegetable garden. She planted new seeds, she fixed the creaky porch step, she got the shutter back on the second-floor window. The house started to feel less like a memory and more like a home. And somewhere in the middle of all of it, she realized she wasn't just fixing the house. She and Eli fell into a rhythm the way rivers find their level. Naturally, without anyone deciding it. He stopped by 2 or 3 times a week. Sometimes it was practical, a tool she needed, a fence issue she'd noticed on their shared property line, a question about the water pressure. Sometimes it was just company. He'd show up in the early evening and they'd end up sitting on the porch, talking about whatever came up, the weather, the town, local history, a book she was reading, a problem he was working through with the ranch. He was easy to talk to in a way that surprised her, not because he talked a lot. He didn't, especially, but he listened in a way that made you feel like what you were saying mattered. He asked follow-up questions. He remembered things you'd mentioned 2 weeks ago. He didn't look at his phone when you were talking. These sound like small things. They are not small things. Clara had spent years with someone who could look directly at her while she was speaking and still somehow make her feel unheard. Eli could be half focused on fixing a fence post and make her feel like the only person in his world. She noticed it. She didn't know what to do with it yet, but she noticed. The whole community was involved. Dot organized the food. The church handled the logistics, and somehow, Clara still wasn't entirely sure how it had happened. She ended up co-organizing the raffle and the promotional materials with Eli. They spent 3 evenings at her kitchen table, Clara on her laptop, Eli on the phone, coordinating donations, papers spread between them, 2 cups of coffee going cold because they kept forgetting to drink them. At one point, Clara looked up from her laptop and caught him reading something she'd written, the event flyer she'd designed. He was reading it carefully, the way he did everything. "This is good," he said. "It's just a flyer." "No," he said, putting it down. "You know how to say a lot with not many words. That's a real skill. Most people use too many." She laughed a little. "Are you saying I'm brief?" "I'm saying you're clear." He looked at her for just a moment longer than usual. People don't give that enough credit. She went back to her laptop. Her heart was doing something she didn't acknowledge out loud. The fundraiser raised nearly 4 times what they'd expected. The family whose barn had burned down cried at the event. The whole town showed up in work boots and Sunday shirts, which in Harlow is the same thing. Clara stood at the edge of the room watching it all, and felt something she hadn't felt in so long she'd almost forgotten it was possible. She felt like she belonged somewhere. At the diner on a Thursday morning, Clara overheard a conversation she wasn't meant to. 2 women at the table behind her, talking in the way people talk when they assume they're private, not quite remembering that diner acoustics carry everything. "I heard Ruth's granddaughter is staying on for a while." "Clarissa, or the other one?" "Clara, the marketing one. She's 30, single, came out from Chicago." A pause. Poor thing. Clara's jaw tightened. She stared at her coffee. "I heard she had a bad relationship." At 30 and single, that's just, it's hard, isn't it? At a certain point, the conversation moved on to something else. Clara finished her coffee, paid at the counter, smiled at Dot, who gave her a look that said she'd heard it too and was sorry. She drove home feeling something complicated. Not quite anger, not quite sadness, something in between, That specific feeling of being reduced to a data point in someone else's calculation of what a life should look like. She told Eli about it that evening when he stopped by. He listened all the way through, didn't interrupt. When she was done, he was quiet for a moment, like he was choosing his words carefully. Then he said, "People confuse lonely with alone. You don't seem lonely to me." She looked at him. "Honestly," he said, "you seem like one of the least lonely people I've met in a long time. And that's got nothing to do with whether or not you're with someone." Clara didn't answer, but something in her chest loosened a little, like a knot she'd been carrying for so long she'd started to think it was just a part of her. She met Eli's mother on a Saturday in July. Her name was Ruth, same as Clara's grandmother, which Eli said was a coincidence but that his mother took as a sign. She was in her late 60s, short, sharp-eyed, with the kind of dry humor that sneaks up on you before you realize you've been had. She came to the farm on the premise of returning a pie dish that had been borrowed by Clara's grandmother sometime in 2019. She came in, looked around the house, declared that Clara had done good work with the kitchen, sat down without being asked, and accepted tea. She said, very directly, without preamble, "You're the first woman my son has looked at in 3 years. I thought you should know." Clara nearly choked on her tea. "Mom says things," Eli said from the doorway, where he had appeared looking approximately like he wanted to disappear. "Don't take it. I say true things," his mother corrected. She turned back to Clara. "He's a good man, not in a brag-about-it way, just in a real way. He's also very stubborn, and he holds things too close to his chest, and he will fix your problems before he tells you about his own. You'll need to be patient with that." "Mom, I'm just being efficient," she said mildly. She finished her tea, stood up, patted Clara's hand. "Your grandmother was one of my favorite people in this town. You're doing right by her house." She picked up the pie dish and walked out. Eli stood in the kitchen doorway, looking mortified in a quiet, contained way. "She's wonderful," Clara said. "She's a hazard," he said. But he was almost smiling, and Clara was definitely smiling. The almost moment happened on a Tuesday evening in August. They had been out in the barn, Eli's barn, at the Callaway Ranch, doing a final check on the donations collected for the town's fall harvest drive. Clara had been helping organize and label boxes. It had been a long, easy, comfortable evening, the kind where you lose track of time because you're not watching it. As they finished and walked toward the barn door, the evening was doing that thing Montana evenings do, where the sky goes every shade of color at once and the air turns just cool enough to feel like a breath. They stopped in the doorway, and something changed. Clara couldn't have said what, exactly. Just that the air between them was suddenly different, heavier, quieter. Eli was looking at her in a way that was different from how he usually looked at her. Not intense or dramatic, just honest, like he'd stopped holding something back. She felt it too. She knew he could tell she felt it. And then Clara's heart did that thing it always did when something felt real and good and terrifying all at once. It bolted. She made a joke about the drive home taking forever on the gravel road, stepped back, said goodnight, and walked to her car at a perfectly normal pace that she was absolutely sure didn't look like fleeing. It looked exactly like fleeing. Eli didn't follow. He didn't call after her. He let her go, and somehow that was the most unnerving thing of all, being given space by someone who wasn't trying to control whether she stayed or went. She drove home in the dark with her hands tight on the wheel and her heart loud in her ears. That night she couldn't sleep. She sat in the kitchen with a cup of tea that went cold and asked herself the question she'd been avoiding for weeks. Was she pulling away from Eli because she wasn't interested? Or was she pulling away because she was completely, terrifyingly interested, and the only way she knew how to protect herself was to make herself smaller before someone else got the chance to? She knew the answer. She'd known it for a while. The more frightening question was, what was she going to do with it? She had been told, in 100 small ways, that she was too much, too emotional, too opinionated, too loud, that she had left things too long, that the kind of love she wanted was unrealistic, that at 30, a woman's options narrow, and the smart thing is to be grateful for what's available. And here was a man who listened when she talked, showed up without being asked, looked at her like she was the most sensible thing in the room, and whose mother had just voluntarily told her that he hadn't looked at anyone in 3 years. Clara put down her cold tea. She thought, what if the voice that says you're too much is simply the voice of everyone who was too small to hold you? She went to bed. She slept. She called her boss in the morning and accepted the permanent remote position they'd quietly been offering for weeks. She didn't tell anyone in Harlow. She didn't tell Eli. She didn't make an announcement or a decision board or a pros and cons list. She just let herself stay, quietly, without explaining it. She ordered seeds for a second round of planting before winter. She had the heating system properly serviced. She enrolled in a local pottery class on Wednesday evenings that Dot had mentioned, not because she cared about pottery, but because she wanted something that was just hers. She unpacked her second suitcase properly, hung things up, put her books on the shelf in the living room. Small things, private things, the kind of things that say, without words, I am staying. On a repair day in September, they were fixing the north fence line together, which had become a project they'd been working on in pieces since summer. Eli said, without much setup, I'd like to take you to dinner. Not the diner, somewhere proper, if you'd want that. Clara kept working for a beat. Then she said, that might genuinely be the least romantic way anyone has ever asked me out. He considered this. Probably. You're not going to try again with better wording? No. She laughed. And it was the kind of laugh that comes out before you can soften it or make it more acceptable. Loud and real, and a little undignified. The kind of laugh she had been told was too much. Eli looked at her with something that might have been quiet delight. You're smiling, he said. I know I am. So that's a yes? Yeah, she said. That's a yes. The dinner was at a steakhouse about 40 miles out, the kind of place with low lighting and cloth napkins, and a wine list that actually required thought. Clara wore a blue dress she hadn't had occasion to put on in months. Eli showed up in a proper jacket and clean boots, and his hair combed, which somehow made him look both more dressed up and more like himself at the same time. They talked for 3 hours, not about repairs or the town or logistics, about real things. His father, who had passed when Eli was 22 and left the ranch entirely in his hands. The years he'd spent figuring out what kind of man he wanted to be inside of that responsibility, a relationship he'd had in his late 20s that had ended because he'd wanted to stay in Harlow and she hadn't, and how that was no one's fault, just a mismatch that hurt anyway. And Clara talked too, really talked, about her ex and what it had done to her sense of herself, about her mother and the years of quiet pressure, about finding the journal, about the morning in the bathroom at 26:30 when she'd looked in the mirror and hadn't recognized herself. Eli listened to all of it. He didn't flinch. He didn't offer solutions. He just listened and nodded, and at one point said, for what it's worth, from where I'm sitting, you seem like exactly who you're supposed to be. Clara looked at him across the table. She said, you're going to be difficult to walk away from, you know that? He said, then don't. Simple as that. The months that followed were not a fairy tale, which is exactly what made them good. There were difficult moments. There was the argument in October over something small, a misunderstanding about her plans for Thanksgiving, blown out of proportion because Clara was tired and scared and her old defenses were up, and she started pushing in the way she'd learned to push when she expected to be pushed away first. She said things she didn't entirely mean. She told him she wasn't sure this made sense. Eli didn't argue back. He didn't storm off. He said, very quietly, I'm not looking for a reason to leave, and I'm not going anywhere just because you're scared. But if you need me to go right now so you can think, I'll do that. She told him to stay. They talked for a long time. Not a comfortable conversation. An honest one. The kind where you say things you've never said out loud, and your voice shakes a little, and you feel exposed in a way that is terrifying, and also, somehow, exactly right. By the end of it, Clara understood something she hadn't quite understood before. Being with someone who doesn't want to control you means you also can't use your defenses as a weapon. You have to actually show up. You have to actually say the real thing. It was harder than she'd expected. It was better than anything she'd expected. In November, she went back to Chicago for 2 weeks to finalize some things. close out her apartment, see her friends. It was strange being back. The city was the same. It felt smaller somehow, not the buildings but the particular version of herself she had been there. She met her friends for dinner, and they were wonderful, genuinely wonderful, and also, for the first time, she didn't feel like she was performing okayness for them. She actually was okay. More than okay. You look different, her best friend said. Different how? Her friend thought about it. Relaxed, like you stopped holding your breath. Clara thought about that on the plane home, because it was true. She had stopped holding her breath. She hadn't noticed when it happened, exactly. Somewhere between the cracked pipe and the fence line and 3 hours of honest conversation over a good steak. She landed back in Montana in the early afternoon. Eli was at the airport, which she had not asked him to be and had not expected. He just said, "Flight was on time, figured I'd be here." She hugged him. Properly. The kind where you don't let go for a minute. He hugged her back. She was home. Spring arrived in Harlow the way it always did. Slowly at first, then all at once. The fields went from brown to green almost overnight. Clara's garden came back to life ahead of schedule. The porch was repainted. The farmhouse, a year and a half from the day she'd arrived, looked like a place that was genuinely lived in and genuinely loved. Clara was 31 years old. She was, by any reasonable definition, doing great. The remote work was going well. Her garden was producing more than she could eat. She'd been talked into joining the committee for the Harlow Harvest Festival in October. She had become, quietly, part of the fabric of this place. And she and Eli had spent the better part of a year building something that felt, for the first time in her adult life, like solid ground. Clara was on the porch with her coffee, watching the fog lift off the fields, wearing an old flannel shirt of Eli's that she had borrowed and then simply never returned. She heard his truck on the gravel. He was early. He came around to the porch and stopped at the steps. He looked at her for a long moment. The way he looked at things when he was about to say something that mattered. Then he came up the steps, and he got down on one knee, and he held out a ring that was simple and small, and had belonged to his grandmother, and he said, "I'm not asking because it's time, or because it's the next thing that's supposed to happen. I'm asking because you're the person I want next to me. Not just on good days, on the hard ones, on the boring ones, on the days when the fence breaks and the rain won't stop and neither of us is at our best. I want you for all of it, if you'll have me." Clara looked at him. She thought about the bathroom mirror at 6:47 in the morning. She thought about 2 suitcases and a rental car and a farmhouse that needed everything. She thought about her grandmother's journal and a man who said hello like there was nothing unusual about it. She thought about the diner and the women who had said "poor thing." She thought about every voice that had ever told her she was too late, too much, too anything. Then she looked at Eli, kneeling on her porch in a flannel shirt and worn boots on a Thursday morning, asking her not because it was time, but because it was her. She said yes. Then she laughed. Then she cried. Then she said yes again, louder, like she wanted to hear herself mean it. Because she did. She called her mother that afternoon. The conversation was different this time. Not because her mother had entirely changed. People don't change entirely. Not quickly. Not all at once. But Clara came to it differently. She wasn't defending herself anymore. She wasn't waiting to be told she'd done things in the wrong order or at the wrong time. She was just calling to share something good. And her mother, surprised maybe by the steadiness in Clara's voice, said something she hadn't said in years. She said, "You sound like yourself." Clara said, "I know. I'm working on that." Her mother cried a little. Clara let her. The wedding was in September, at the Calloway Ranch. They kept it small. The whole town of Harlow came anyway, because that's how Harlow works. Dot catered, which meant the food was extraordinary. The flowers came from Clara's own garden. The ceremony was held outside, with the mountains behind them, and the kind of sky that looked almost too beautiful to be real. The officiant was the same man who had married half of Harlow over the past 30 years. He knew Eli from the time he was 8 years old. He told a story at the ceremony about Eli as a boy that made everyone laugh, including Eli, which was rare enough to be remarkable. Clara's vows made people cry, then laugh, then cry again. Eli's vows were short. He said, "You showed up here and fixed a house that needed fixing, and without knowing it, you fixed a few things in me too. I want to spend the rest of my life being the kind of person who deserves to stand next to you." Clara grabbed his hand. She thought, no one had ever said anything like that to her, not once. And it had come from a man who had never once, in all the months she had known him, made her feel like she was too much for the space she took up. Later that evening, when the guests had started to thin and the sky had gone dark and full of stars, Clara stood at the fence line that separated what was now their combined property. Her farmhouse, his ranch, merged now, not just legally but in every practical and real and daily way. She thought about the drive out here, a year and a half ago, the 2 suitcases, the cracked pipe, the way the sky had felt enormous and empty and a little bit like a dare. It still felt enormous. It didn't feel empty anymore. Eli came and stood beside her. He didn't say anything. He didn't have to. He put his arm around her shoulders, and they stood there together in the quiet, looking out at the dark fields and the lit-up ranch house and the farmhouse with every window glowing. And Clara thought, this is the thing no one tells you about starting over. They tell you it's hard. They tell you it's brave. They tell you it takes courage. All of that is true. What they don't tell you is that sometimes, if you're lucky, starting over doesn't look like starting from nothing. Sometimes it looks like arriving somewhere you didn't know you were headed, like following something quiet and true inside yourself, even when you couldn't hear it clearly, until you end up somewhere you recognize, not from memory, but from something deeper, like home. She was 31 years old. She was not a woman who had missed her chance. She was a woman who had stopped measuring herself by someone else's clock, and found that the moment she did, time started feeling like something entirely different. Not a deadline, a gift. Now, if you are someone who has ever been made to feel like you are running out of time, if you have sat at a family dinner and felt the weight of an unasked question in someone's eyes, if you have watched a birthday come and go and felt something that wasn't quite grief but was close to it, then this story is also for you. Because what Clara's story is really about is not finding love at 31. Love is almost beside the point. What it is really about is the moment she stopped letting other people's timelines become her own internal voice. The moment she heard herself say out loud, "I am not a timeline, I am a person," and meant it. That is the moment the story actually changed. Not when Eli knocked on her door. Not when she found the journal. Not when she said yes on the porch in her flannel shirt. Those were beautiful moments, all of them. But they were consequences of something quieter that happened first. A woman choosing to stop shrinking. Choosing to stay somewhere that felt like breath, even when she couldn't fully explain why. Choosing, one small decision at a time, herself. Clara used to think that choosing herself was a selfish thing. That's what years of being called too much will do to you. It makes you suspicious of your own instincts. It makes you second-guess the things you want, and over-explain the space you take up, and apologize for the volume of your laugh in a quiet restaurant. She doesn't do that anymore. And the interesting thing, the thing worth paying attention to, is that the moment she stopped making herself smaller, the life that came toward her was larger. Not louder, not more dramatic, just more real, more solid, like the difference between a photograph of a place and actually standing in it. Eli would tell you, if you asked him, that he didn't choose Clara because of any grand romantic logic. He would say it in his way, quietly, without much decoration. He would say he just paid attention. He saw who she was. He liked who she was. That was enough for him to show up, and keep showing up, until the rest worked itself out. Which is, maybe, all any of us can ever really do for each other. Pay attention. Show up. Keep showing up. The farmhouse is full now in the way old houses were meant to be full. Not crowded, but alive. There are work boots by the door that belong to both of them. There are 2 coffee cups in the morning, the radio on in the background, a garden that changes with the seasons. Eli's ranch and Clara's farmhouse share a fence line, and sometimes in the early morning when Clara walks that line, she thinks about how the land doesn't know it was ever divided. It's just land. It doesn't keep track of what was supposed to belong where. She thinks people are maybe a little like that too. We carry these ideas of what should have happened by now, what we should have been by now, who we should have become by now, and we forget that life doesn't actually know those rules. Life is just the land, wide and uninterested in our timelines, full of things that will grow if you plant them and wait, and don't give up before the season turns. Clara's grandmother knew that. She wrote it in a journal in 1962, in a house that her granddaughter would eventually find her way back to. They all thought I had missed my chance. And then Henry just showed up and said hello like there was nothing unusual about it at all. Some things are worth waiting through the winter for. Some people show up not when you're ready, but when you've stopped performing readiness and simply started being honest. They find you not at your best, or your most polished, or your most put together, but in your flannel shirt on a Thursday morning with cold coffee in your hand, saying yes because you mean it. And if you are still waiting for your Thursday morning, if the barn hasn't burned down yet, if the pipe hasn't broken, if you haven't driven west on a highway that turns into something quieter, then maybe just let Clara's story sit with you for a moment. Not as proof that it always works out, not as a promise that love is around the corner if you're patient enough, but as a reminder that the voice telling you that you've missed your chance is not an authority, it is just a voice, and you are allowed to stop listening to it. You are allowed to be 30, or 35, or 42, and still be at the beginning of something. You are allowed to leave what doesn't fit. You are allowed to drive somewhere quiet and ask yourself what you actually want, and take as long as you need to hear the answer. You are allowed to take up the space you take up without apologizing for the volume of your laugh. Clara would tell you that herself. She'd probably be on the porch when she said it, coffee in hand, watching the morning fog come off the Montana fields, and she'd mean every word.